I'm going to start talking now about interventions, what we can do about it. And my caveat is that because we're dealing with a spectrum here, because we're dealing with continuum of age, because we're dealing with a spectrum on ASD, but also a spectrum in terms of functional abilities and life experience, okay? This is not a one-size-fits-all. This is a continuum, and what I'm going to show you are just examples, right? So this is not, as I said, it's not a recipe book. Okay? We have to use this and learn the principles behind this so that you can generate the content that works for you. So where can we intervene when it comes to key individual strengths? Let's start there, and then we'll move to ecologies. Okay? So in any one domain, or in lots of domains, we can all struggle. Nobody has strengths in everything. Okay? And it's true. We all know that. And even within ourselves, we have relative strengths. Okay? We're better for ourselves in one component than for another component. Okay, if we compared our own abilities or strengths to each other. And there's lots of stories out there, frankly, of thriving in ASD. So what I'll do is, these will come up as in examples, and maybe there's going to be this link overall among people, okay? Some people that you know and some that you don't. So the ones that have been talked about before in terms of thriving, internal strengths, things like academic strength, self-regulation ability I'll talk about, cognitive and spiritual strength, social and physical strength and emotional strength. How do these, what's some research and what are some interventions that are related to autism that have to do with these strengths? Let's see a little bit of what's out there and what the news, what media also says about it, okay? There are other strengths that are not on this list that are important strengths, and I think that, this is just examples, okay? So the first one that I'll talk about I think is interesting is self-regulation. So self-regulation is the ability to select goals, optimize our resources to achieve those goals, and compensate when we're finding those challenges. Okay? So do I have a goal in mind, whatever it is, big or small? It doesn't have to be my goal is I'm going to graduate university 4 years from now. That could be the goal, but there's also goals of what am I going to do today? What am I going to do in this moment? Right? What am I doing right now? How am I going to achieve that goal? Right? What do I need to achieve it? Okay, and if there's an issue, how do I work around that issue? That's the idea of self-regulation. So there's lots of ways to look at this. There was one interesting study that compared young children with autism to children with Down syndrome without autism in their play, and they measured self-regulation in play with mothers. Right? Interesting young study, very controlled in a lab environment where they observed and they kind of did behavioral ratings of self-regulation, a whole bunch of different components of self-regulation. The point here is that what they ended up saying in the end is, the youth with autism showed less self-regulated play than the youth with Down syndrome without autism. Okay? And what more specifically, an ability to sustain their focus, difficulties with flexibility, difficulties or less exploration of different objects which constrain their set of goals, and overall less goal-directed play of doing something socially or functionally based in their play. A lot of this makes a lot of sense because of the clinicians in the room who do assessments with young children, all of that probably resonates. But I think what's interesting as part of their discussion was about, okay, what can we do about that? Right? And one thing that they brought up, and I think it's important that we consider, is how do we actually intervene around self-regulation? There's a large history of evidence around self-management training in ASD and beyond ASD, where we can teach an individual to help to learn the skills that are required to control their own behavior and to rely on themselves to direct their behaviors rather than on external prompts. So the behaviorists in the room, I think it's important, they probably know about this, but everybody should know that any aspect of behavior therapy that involves external prompts, a major component of that is fading those external prompts, right? To promote independence, to promote that internalization of skill, right? And so self-management training is a key kind of message behind that. So how do we teach somebody to self-monitor? How do we teach them to assess their own behaviors, to record or to think about their behaviors, to evaluate, okay? And most importantly, probably, to reinforce themselves, to praise themselves, to be good to themselves when they actually make that effort in the right direction. But there's a whole literature on how do you actually do this, and when it's done correctly, there are actually quite large effect sizes in youth with ASD as well as adults around teaching self-management skills. Right? And that's a key component, although it's a different language, self-regulation, self-management. They're very connected. right? And so I'm not going to go through all of those different components of self-management. There could be an entire day workshop on how do you teach self-management training, but there's this great website that I'm directing you to, right? Don't forget about self-management, okay? And it has a whole list of kind of different aspects of how to do it. But I find it a very useful, important kind of component to promoting self-regulation in ASD. So we can promote self-regulation up to a point, certainly. There's probably been the most amount of work in terms of internal strengths in ASD on cognitive and adaptive behavior. Right? Among anything else, we've spent the most amount of time measuring cognition, intellectual functioning, and measuring adaptive levels and seeing how can we improve those, right? Especially in young children. So we know that there's we can have with early intensive behavioral intervention very large effects on cognitive ability overall and moderate effects on independent living skills or adaptive behavior in young children with ASD who are, typically in the literature and the meta-analyses 2.5 to 5.5 years of age, right? What's interesting, as a side note, in BC, with the CASDA report, the Autism in Canada report, we asked all the caregivers when was the child you're reporting on diagnosed with ASD. Okay? Now, most of them, 92% were diagnosed in BC, so it's not like most of them came from another province who were reporting on it. So this is those who are currently preschoolers. Okay, those who are currently preschoolers and had received a diagnosis already, so it doesn't include people who are on a waiting list for a diagnosis for an assessment. But of those that had been diagnosed with ASD, and we asked them when were they first diagnosed, on average it was around 3 years of age. Okay, here, and it ranged from as low as 1 year of age to 4 years of age. That's in the preschoolers. Okay, here. I'm not sure if that resonates with you, if that makes sense in your context, but I think it's interesting to note when we ask the parents of school-age youth right now when they were diagnosed, the average age was 6.5, okay, and then if we ask the parents of adults when were they first diagnosed, it's even higher. But there are lots of cohort effects. I mean, there's a whole process here going on, right? But the point is that if we're talking about today here in BC, this was in 2014, so recently, that kind of cohort of preschoolers, the average age was about 3 that they were talking about, with still substantial variability. Okay, so it's in this range of early IBI. Whether that translates into actually accessing intensive behavioral intervention at the right time, that's different. After diagnosis, it's different. You've had Dawson and Rogers and Vismara, noted researchers and clinicians in the area of very early intervention in ASD come and speak as part of ACT before. So many people are aware of Early Start Denver model and related relational developmental approaches to behavioral intervention that are still very intensive in nature. And usually involve kind of parent involvement. And it's striking, the data and the emerging data that's coming out now really does demonstrate around, so what about cognitive and adaptive behaviors? What is it showing? In the original study that Dawson published in 2010, they had 24 very young children, all under 30 months of age at entry, participate in their ESDM compared to 21 who were in this kind of assess and monitor group. And they looked at them a year into treatment and say 2 years into treatment. There's been other research published since then as well, but this is just that 2010 study. And what they actually found is that a year after of involvement in the trial, there were no between-group differences in cognitive change or in adaptive behavior. Right? This was not a quick shift in terms of those domains. Right? In fact, there was a slight decline relative to what they expected for that youth age. As they were getting older, they weren't learning the skills as much. 2 years in, the ESDM group showed substantial improvement in cognitive ability as a result of receptive and expressive language skills, right, that improved. So remember what we said, but if we're talking about thriving, and this is in the context of thriving, social communication ability, right, and language is certainly a part of that, is a key component of the ratings of thriving that I talked about. So any of these interventions that are shown to boost language ability, that are shown to boost that ability to engage expressively and receptively with others, does fit with this model of boosting that strength, that internal piece. It is a part of the story. Okay? The other group also gained in terms of cognitive functioning at around 7 points on average. So both groups gained, but the ESDM group significantly more. There wasn't a significant gain in adaptive behavior. Okay? They maintain the same almost level of adaptive behavior, which the authors subscribe to say that's actually not a bad thing, because as kids get older, they're expected to do more. So if they have the same level of adaptive behavior, it really means that they're staying at least they're staying on their developmental course, rather than a larger gap occurring between what they're expected to do and what they can actually do. Right? But the point is, if we're talking about boosting adaptive behavior beyond that and building more skills at this age, at this very young age, it wasn't there yet. But at least this is certainly an example of boosting cognitive ability. Okay. There was interesting tangent. There was a study that was done, I believe, in Scandinavia, a Scandinavian country in Norway, with Richard Hastings from the UK, as well as a few others, that looked at early behavioral intervention in preschoolers with Down syndrome who don't have autism over a year, where they were provided with behavior therapy for 2 to 3 hours a day, kind of as part of their preschoolers, and they showed almost a full standard deviation increase in cognitive ability after 1 year. Right? So IBI, it doesn't just work, in terms of boosting cognitive ability for youth with ASD. It's a very interesting kind of side note, that this is principles of learning and teaching, then that's what really matters. Now, in Ontario, we've got our own IBI program, and Adrian Perry and others have studied the delivery of the IBI program as it is done in Ontario. They published a study recently that looked at 207 youth who were in that program, who started in that program between 2 and 14 years of age. Right, so date of entry, we can't really call it's not early IBI for all of these youth. Some entered in quite late in terms of being into the program. And they looked at the predictors of the cognitive and adaptive changes, which is why I'm sharing it with you now. So what was related to change? IQ at entry, so the level of intellectual functioning at entry, was predictive of cognitive gains. So those who came in with better cognitive abilities ended up making greater gains in cognitive skill over time. Okay? But also age. Those who were younger made greater gains over time. And all of the children who made substantial gains in cognitive skills, so in the boosting in cognitive skills, were under age 6 when they entered the program. And the group that had the least amount of gains were over age 8 when they started in the IBI program, or who had very low intellectual skills, abilities to start with. So this is all to say, I'm not kind of saying this is the program that everybody should be in, but these are some of the studies that are out there, looking at how do we and who fits with what kind of programs to develop cognitive and adaptive behavior. Adaptive skills, though, can be learned across the lifespan. Right? This is not just because those are IBI programs that I was talking about specifically, but there are meta-analysis after meta-analysis looking at studies that test certain applied behavioral analysis technologies, right? And show that whether you're talking about school-age youth, 6 to 14 years of age, or if you're talking about individuals with ASD, 15 to 22 years of age, there are a number of different applied techniques of applied behavioral analysis that have been shown in the literature to boost adaptive behavior. Right? So this is not just behavior therapy. It's not just for young kids, right, of course, but it has to be done effectively, of course, to have these kinds of gains. It has to be done well to have these gains. I'm not going to go through each one of these, right? This is really a slide meant to overwhelm you on purpose, because the point is that whether you look at one technique, or another technique, why all these ones? Because it matters. The person matters in this. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Okay? But the point is that we can boost cognitive skill and we can boost adaptive behavior, certainly well beyond even the preschool years. So I had a chance to kind of meet with Temple Grandin. I was really impressed, not only, of course, with her story and what we've read, but her messages. And the messages were more than just putting her up as an example of look at her strengths around visualization and her ability to achieve in terms of her PhD and what she's done around livestock, for example, and her passion around that. But it was her messages to families that were most compelling to me, right? Her messages when families asked, what should I do about my child? And her answer was push them, not physically, but challenge them, right? Her message of don't give up. For me, myself, it took a tremendous amount of support to boost my skills. I wasn't born with all of these abilities that I have now, right? Her messages of my mother, my aunt, my science teacher, one-on-one speech therapy, a nanny who spent all day, this is kind of her message. So even in cases where we think about somebody like Temple Grandin, and she's so famous for what she's achieved, it doesn't start by just her ability. It starts by the right programs and supports and interventions being in place to build that in her when she was younger, right? Social skills, I think that's a really important message that I wanted to leave you with. So again, you've also had, Dr. Lageson here presenting on the Peers program before. When it comes to building social skills, that's another asset, right, that we bring is our social abilities, right? There is a lot of evidence based on what we can do for youth and for young people. I'm not going to go through the whole point is that there is a substantial set of research out there and a manual so that fits with this idea of thriving. If we want thriving, part of that probably is, if we're talking about social communication, is enabling timely and effective access to evidence-based social skills interventions. I'm not sure if you've met Alex Plank before, but you're going to see here Alex learning to flirt. So who thought that learning to flirt is going to be related to a talk on thriving? But the point, I think you get the point here, is that for some people in some contexts at the right age and with their goals, that is going to be a part of what it means to develop a skill set that's going to fit with their environment.